Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into a moment in the biblical narrative that often gets glossed over as just a quick farewell. But according to the source material we're looking at, it's actually a massive cosmic coronation. We're talking about the Ascension of Christ. We're going to flip the script on this event and see it not as an exit, but as an enthronement. All right, so let's just jump right in. To make sure we're all on the same page, let's start with the most basic question of all. What exactly is the Ascension? For most people, the answer is pretty straightforward. It's the moment Jesus physically left the earth. And look, that's true. But the source material for this explainer shows that if we stop there, we're missing the entire point. This isn't just about a departure. It's one of the most decisive, game-changing moments in the whole story. Okay, so let's dig into our first section and really unpack why the Ascension is so much more than a simple goodbye. And it all starts with the very clouds that took him out of sight. And this is where it gets really fascinating. The source material explains that the cloud we read about in Acts chapter 1 wasn't just, some random bit of weather. In the Old Testament, this specific kind of cloud, the glory cloud, was the symbol of God's actual, tangible presence. It filled the temple. It led the people through the desert. So this wasn't a cloud to hide him. It was a cloud that was welcoming him into the divine presence. So the real takeaway here isn't that Jesus left Earth, but where he was going. He was stepping into the sphere of divine authority, literally shifting from his role as an earthly teacher to his new role as the heavenly king. You could say he was taking his seat in the control room of the entire cosmos. And that idea perfectly leads us into our second section, where we're going to see how this all builds into the central theme of a royal coronation. This is where the political and royal imagery really comes to life. So the New Testament says over and over again that Jesus was seated at the right hand of God. See, back in the ancient world, this wasn't just some pretty poetic language. It was a specific political title. If you sat at the king's right hand, you were the second in command. You shared his rule, you wielded his power. Think of it as being the prime minister, the ultimate executive. And this whole idea, it has really deep roots. The source highlights that Psalm 110 is actually the most quoted Old Testament text in the entire New Testament. And why? Because everyone saw it as the prophetic script for the Ascension. It's the divine invitation from God the Father for the Messiah to come and take his seat of ultimate power. But wait, the royal stuff doesn't even stop there. Another absolutely critical piece of this puzzle comes from a powerful vision in the book of Daniel. Check this out. In Daniel's vision, this figure called the Son of Man doesn't come down from heaven. No, he moves upward through the heavens to approach God's throne. And there he receives a universal, everlasting kingdom. So the source material brilliantly connects these two scenes, basically showing the Ascension as the live-action fulfillment of this heavenly ceremony. Jesus is that Son of Man, officially receiving his dominion. All right, this next section adds a whole other layer to this coronation, the imagery of a conquering warrior who's returning from battle to celebrate his epic triumph. The source material points out this ancient pattern you see in Old Testament passages like Psalm 68. You have a divine warrior who comes down to fight, wins a huge, decisive victory, and then ascends his holy mountain in a grand triumphal procession. Well, what is that? It's the exact pattern of Christ's work. He descends in the incarnation, he defeats his enemies at the cross and resurrection, and then he ascends in triumph. And we're not just talking about a victory over sin and death for individuals. No, the Ascension is a public, cosmic declaration of victory over every single opposing force, what the Bible calls the rulers, authorities, powers, and dominions. And just to grasp the sheer scale of that victory, the book of Ephesians says Christ is now seated far above every single one of these categories of power, whether they're earthly or supernatural. His coronation installs him as the supreme sovereign over the entire fabric of reality. Okay, so there's a king on the throne in heaven. That's huge. But what does that cosmic event actually mean for us down here on earth? Well, this section is all about connecting that heavenly throne room directly to our world. Right before he ascended, Jesus made one final declaration to his followers, and it all hangs on one single, powerful, all-encompassing word. And that word? It's all. His command to go and make disciples, that's not just a good idea or some gentle suggestion. It's a royal decree. It's founded directly on the universal authority he just officially received at his enthronement. It's a direct cause and effect. Because he's king of everything, his people are now sent to everyone. But a good king, a victorious general, doesn't just bark orders. He equips his people for the mission. And pulling from Ephesians 4, the source explains that the ascended Christ now hands out gifts to his church, just like a triumphant general sharing the spoils of war with his army. And these aren't just, personal skills or hobbies. No, these are strategic roles given to build up the church. These are the very instruments through which the king's heavenly authority becomes visible and active right here on earth as he extends his reign through his people. All right, so finally, let's get into the tension this whole thing creates. Christ is reigning as king right now. But, obviously, his complete and total victory isn't fully visible everywhere you look. And this is the great paradox of the kingdom. The way it's often described is this tension between the already and the not yet. The decisive victory has already been won. The king is already on his throne. But we are still waiting for the not yet, that future day when his victory will be fully and finally put on display, when every enemy is gone and the kingdom comes in all its fullness. And get this, the Ascension itself holds the guarantee of that future. The angel's promise couldn't be clearer. The same way he went is the same way he's going to return. The event that kicked off his heavenly reign is also the down payment on his future return to complete it. So let's wrap up with this final thought. When we really get it, when we see the Ascension not as a sad departure, but as a triumphant coronation, it changes how we see everything. The past becomes a victory that's already won. The present becomes a kingdom that is advancing, and the future is a guaranteed return of the king. So the real question for us is, how does viewing all of history from the perspective of a throne, not just a cross, how does that change, everything?